Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. It's time to hear from the top Christian litigators in the nation who have come forward to tell us the truth and help us defend our faith.
Hear ye, hear ye. All rise. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano, is in session.
Welcome once again to Faith on Trial. We're glad you joined us today, and want to make a special welcome to all those people who are just joining us for the first time. Good morning, Gina. How are you?
I'm doing well today, Deacon Mike.
And I'm Deacon Mike Mano, your host. And today we have, I think, an excellent show coming up. We have a couple of good. Yes, we have State Representative Stephen Holt, who is from the western edge of the state, up in Ida County, and Crawford County in there.
Iowa.
And he's going to talk to us about the new religious freedom law that was passed in Iowa and signed by the governor. It's somewhat controversial. It was not passed on a bipartisan basis. So we'll talk to him about that, what it means, and what some of the questions are that emanate from the law.
Right.
And then we're
looking forward to it.
Yeah, and then we're going to talk to Joensen Fleischer, who is a legal counsel with the Advocates for Faith and Freedom. She's involved in a number of these cases, as well as her organization, her law firm there, involving restrictions on people of faith during the COVID period. In other words, all the COVID restrictions, the mandates for the shots, the COVID shots, and mandates that church be closed and things like that. So we'll have an interesting talk with her about that, because we tend to think that that's all over now, and it's not.
No.
It's not. It's still going on, and there still appears to be some animus against our co-religionists there. And
I'll be interested to know if those cases are helped by the fact that so much information is coming out about, the adverse effects that were covered up and the vaccine efficacy. It'll be interesting to see what she says about that.
Yeah. So we'll have them both on, and we'll talk about those things, kind of related.
Yes, very related.
Yes.
One affects the other.
Yes. Do you have a prayer to open us up with?
I do. A prayer for peace today. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of peace, bring your peace to our violent world. Peace in the hearts of all men and women, and peace among our nations on this earth. Turn to your way of love those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred. Strengthen us all in hope, and give us the wisdom and the courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among the nations and in the hearts of all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Gina. And we will be right back with our first guest after these messages. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and we have with us right now in the studio a guest, State Representative Stephen Holt from Crawford County. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You're from Crawford County, and he's been in the legislature, did you say 10 years?
Yes.
Wow. So you're a veteran.
A little bit.
Okay.
Time has flown by, but yeah, at this point, I guess I am a veteran.
and you served as a Marine drill sergeant for something like 20 years?
I was in the Marine Corps for 20 years. I was a drill instructor for 5 of those 20 years.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure I would have wanted to meet you on the, on the drill floor. Yeah. That was a challenging job.
Marine Corps was great. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It taught me so many of my life's lessons. In terms of discipline and
we
drive.
thank you for your service, both in the Marine Corps, armed for our country, and for your service in the legislature.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you today about something that was passed last week.
Yes.
It was Iowa's version of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Yes.
And we've had a lot of controversy about that act, although I should mention that when it was originally passed by Congress, the federal version of that, Chuck Schumer, who was in the House then, was the floor sponsor in the House. Ted Kennedy was the floor sponsor in the Senate, and Bill Clinton signed the thing, and it passed the Senate something like 97-3.
Right.
Okay. Now, you just passed an Iowa version of that. how bipartisan was that? Just not to get into the weeds.
Unfortunately, it was not. If my memory serves me correctly, it was all Republicans voted for it, and I believe no Democrats voted for it. So it's unfortunate because it's being twisted today in terms of what it does and the reason that we need to have it. It's unfortunate.
Part of what I hear is the claim is it gives us license to discriminate and to hate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, tell us what the law actually does.
Yeah, and you brought up the excellent point about why the United States government ultimately passed it is because prior to 1993, the standard that courts had always applied is what is called the strict scrutiny standard, which is the highest judicial standard, requires compelling government interest and a narrowly tailored solution if government is going to infringe on a fundamental right. It's the same judicial standard that's used for free speech and association. Mm-hmm. So prior to that 1993 Supreme Court ruling, that had been the standard. Then there was a Supreme Court ruling in either 92 or 93 related to actually a Native American tribe, and it sort of turned that on its head. And that ruling basically was, well, unless the law specifically targets religion, it's okay, which left thousands of laws basically unchecked. And so as a result of that, it was indeed the Democrats in 1993 that introduced that legislation, and we had federal RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Then along comes another court ruling that said, well, the federal RFRA applies only to federal government and federal laws, did not apply to state. And I should emphasize at this point that RFRA only applies to government intrusion on religion. It has nothing to do with businesses. And so at that point, states began to pass their own version of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to ensure that highest judicial standard of strict scrutiny would be used when we're talking about the fundamental right of religious liberty. So there are a number of states. In fact, while we were passing it, 2 other states passed it in the days and in the week that we passed it. It's extremely important. And it is not, we hear a lot of this stuff about it, it signals or allows discrimination. That's just not true. It is actually a balancing test for the courts to use when government intrudes upon this fundamental right of religious liberty. It's a balancing test that the court needs to follow, compelling government interest and a narrowly tailored solution.
Let's talk about the specifics of the law right now. And we should mention it has been signed by the governor.
It has.
And so it is in effect right now.
It is.
And I think there are now about 30 states that have their own state RFRAs.
By my count, it's I think 27 have enacted RFRA laws, and another 3 as a result of court rulings basically have the RFRA standard. So I think you're right. It's around 30 states.
Okay. So now what does this bill do? Let's talk about some of the situations that may occur.
Yeah. And I have some excellent examples of how RFRA has been used. And one thing I would say is it's never been used successfully to allow discrimination. That's not what it's about. It doesn't ensure winners and losers. It is a balancing test that courts have to use. An example of how it was used was with an Amish community. They drive buggies down the state highways, and the state said you have to put these orange triangles on the back of your buggies. That was against their religious beliefs. So with RFRA in place in that state, with that balancing test that was required by RFRA, the court ruling was okay. It is a compelling government interest that we have safety on our highways, but what is a narrowly tailored solution? And the narrowly tailored solution was that the Amish people were allowed to hang lanterns on the back of their buggies, which did not violate their religious beliefs. So the compelling government interest of safety was met, and the narrowly tailored solution was those lanterns. That is an example of the importance and how the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is used. It's not used to allow discrimination. That's I actually think the people saying that, frankly, want a rigged system. In the world we live in today, unfortunately, it's not 1993, and there are a lot of individuals in government that are hostile toward religious belief and toward churches that represent those beliefs. That's just a fact. And so this will help with that important standard, that very high judicial standard to protect religious liberty. There are a number of other instances in how this has been used, but it's never been used to allow discrimination.
I know the claim is that now a pizza shop owner doesn't have to bake a pizza for somebody that he doesn't like, somebody that may be gay or somebody that may be the wrong color or something, that he's now legally allowed to discriminate. Yeah. And that's not the case.
No, and the way RFRA would come into play there, let's say that the person files a complaint with a government agency toward that individual, RFRA would come into play there, and then you're going to have that balancing test. There's an example of a florist, I believe, or a baker where RFRA was in place, and that baker or florist, I don't remember which it was, actually lost under RFRA. So, again, it is that balancing test. The court's going to have to look at what the compelling government interest is and what the, how the Religious Freedom Restoration Act comes into play, and it creates that balancing test. No guarantee winners or losers, but it does guarantee at least a fair day in court for those with firmly held religious beliefs who possibly believe that they shouldn't have to participate in a gay wedding or something like that. So it just creates a little bit more of a level playing field. That's it.
Okay.
The foster care system comes to mind when I think about the protections. We've seen many states or local communities that barring Christians or people of Christian faith of being foster parents because they will not affirm gender ideology, right, or some of this other
Washington
disorder.
And Oregon are examples of that. Yes.
Sure. Would this kind of a law protect families to be able to continue to be foster parents in that situation?
I absolutely believe that it does create a level playing field for them in court to be able to say this is a violation of our firmly held religious beliefs, and that compelling government interest, narrowly tailored solution, strict scrutiny standard would definitely come into play. And again, it's not going to guarantee winners and losers, but and I think that's why, frankly, those who are hostile to religious faith and, for instance, don't want people to be able to practice their faith in the public square, just shut up and do it in church, and you're not allowed to practice your religious beliefs in the public square. I think that's why they don't want RFRA, because they frankly want a rigged system. They want to be able to rule against people of faith in the situation you just talked about.
Well, without RFRA, in the case we're just talking about with the foster care, the state only needs to say you're violating our rules.
Right.
And
that's correct.
There's no counterpunch on the other side to say, well, wait a second. We have some sincerely held religious beliefs about this. Now we at least get the chance to argue it in court in front of what we hope is a neutral judge. But we've seen a lot of animus against religious freedom lately, especially now I guess it was just yesterday it was revealed that a little girl, 9-year-old girl, 11-year-old girl, something like that, in Wisconsin, in a school where they had just granted a pride group as a recognized organization in the school, wanted to organize her own little interdenominational prayer group, and she was turned down. Can't do that.
And I think they'll lose in court.
This is in Washington now.
Well, yeah.
If it gets into a federal court, maybe.
If it gets to a federal court, I think they'll lose. But that's exactly right. The hostility level toward people of faith today, toward religious belief, is it's unprecedented. And that is why I believe that this is important that Iowa have. It's unfortunate that we were the 28th or 29th state. We've been trying to get it done for 10 years that I've been in office, and finally we got it done. It is an extremely important protection in the world we're living in today.
The 29th state would be fine, because that's what we are. We're the 29th state.
Yeah. I think about the same time we passed, I believe it was Idaho maybe, or there was another state that passed it almost like 45 minutes before we did or something like that. So it was very interesting timing.
Yeah. So how is this going to play out?
Well, the governor has signed it. I don't think there's any question as to its constitutionality or anything like that. So it goes into play. And when a situation comes up similar to the things we've talked about, then that balancing test, that strict scrutiny standard, will be required by the courts. And again, it doesn't guarantee winners and losers, but it certainly guarantees that the fundamental right of religious liberty, just like free speech and association, there's a reason that's the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, the First Amendment, because it is fundamentally important. It's one of the reasons that this nation was founded. And so that strict scrutiny standard to protect religious liberty is in place in the state of Iowa. I think it's extremely important with the level of hostility that's going on today, with increasing rules that, there are some, it's no longer about just let me be me. Now it's just let me be me and you have to agree. So increasingly people of faith are being persecuted and targeted for their religious beliefs, and it is demanded that they become part of the alternate version of reality that other people are living in. And I think that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act will help ensure a fair day in court.
What kind of pressure did you have on you when this came up in the legislature? Well,
we had a number of large businesses. The threat always is that businesses are going to leave and pro teams are not going to come and all of this sort of stuff. That has become increasingly hollow and is no longer an effective argument because 30 states have done it. And if these organizations want to just go to 20 states, then I guess they can do that if they don't respect religious liberty and the right of people of faith to have their fair day in court. So there were those threats from some bigger businesses in Iowa that it would impact our economy. That's simply not true. If you look at the data, the states that have passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, if you look at the top 5 performing economic states, I think 3 of the 5 have passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Exactly. So it's become a very hollow argument, and they knew it. Their momentum, you could just tell these businesses that have been fighting against us in previous years, you could just tell this year that they knew it was inevitable, that they were not going to be able to stop it, and that their threats were hollow.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of the argument that they have with parents over transgender kids. If you don't let us to transgender your child, he's going to kill himself.
Right.
Right. And that's proved not only hollow, but it's just the opposite of what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of Iowa because in the last few years in Iowa, we've really stood up for truth in Iowa. We stood up and said, you will use the bathroom of your biology in our public schools. We're not going to subject our young women to having to use changing facilities and bathrooms with males. We've stood up and said we're not going to allow gender reassignment surgeries and hormone therapies and puberty blockers for our minor children. And by the way, Great Britain has just a week or two ago announced they're not going to allow puberty blockers for this stuff anymore either because I believe it was their British Journal of Medicine a few years ago that said that puberty blockers were being given to people with gender dysphoria in the context of, and I'm quoting, profound scientific ignorance. And so now we've got countries that are moving away from doing that. So the pendulum is moving back a little bit, I think, toward reality.
They seem to have more common sense in the European countries right now.
Yeah.
But I think part of that has to do with political pressure over here because this stuff is a political problem. It's developed out of a social contagion that one side has fostered. Yep. And so now we're stuck with that. Yeah.
And we are in a war over these values because the Supreme Court, there was just a ruling by the Supreme Court that seemed to favor people of a different biology using a female restroom. So we're going to see where this goes. There's going to be a lot of battles in court over a lot of these issues, but I don't think there will be over the Religious Freedom Restoration Act because, again, it simply returns that compelling interest standard.
My guess they'll make a try.
They might.
They'll make a try.
They might, but it's passed in 30 other states, so it's not likely to.
And I take it this is pretty similar to the federal one. Doesn't deviate much from what
it is. It simply it does incorporate based on court rulings how RFRA has been applied, so it incorporates that. Folks wanted to say the Democrats during debate wanted to say that it was different from federal RFRA. It actually isn't. It's just that today their viewpoint of it has changed, but the standard of the strict scrutiny standard hasn't changed. It's just very simple. It's a strict scrutiny standard. That hasn't changed.
Yeah, Chuck Schumer's status has changed a little bit. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Gina, did you?
So this legislation, did it have some Democrats? I mean, I know it eventually passed without any support or as a partisan vote.
Right.
In the 10 years ago, were there a mix of legislators from either side of the aisle who supported it, or has it always been very supported?
No. In 1993, when it passed on the federal level, every member of the House of Representatives voted for it, Democrat and Republican.
In the House, it passed on a voice vote.
Yeah.
That's how
the U.S. House.
The U.S. House.
Yeah.
And then in the Senate, there were only three senators that voted against it.
97-3.
Yeah, and so it was bipartisan back in the day. It's just the strict scrutiny standard hasn't changed. It's the issues that have changed, and the fact that the hostility, religious belief today comes into conflict with the agenda of the left. It's that simple. Religious liberty today comes into conflict with the agenda of the left, which has been embraced by many Democrats. It's unfortunate that it has become a partisan issue, but that's why.
Just out of curiosity, how many of your Democratic colleagues came up to you during the debate and whispered in your ear saying, I'd really like to go with you, but I got pressure on me?
Yeah. Actually, none of them on this issue.
Okay.
Now, on other issues, I've heard that before. And I'm sure maybe they hear it on some issues as well. But on this particular issue, I did not hear that.
That was pretty clear. Okay.
So does this rule or this law now applies to state government in Iowa? Does it filter down also to our cities and counties and school boards and
any
all
government?
Of them?
Yes, any government intrusion on religious liberty, a RFRA would apply.
Okay, and how about some of the myths that we can dispel that we're going to hear probably as we go into this next election cycle?
Well, the biggest one is that it green lights discrimination. That's just absurd. Actually, not having it is what greenlit discrimination. Not having a strict scrutiny standard to protect religious belief, that was the discrimination. So the other side often screams, unfortunately, things that they themselves are doing. So I think they actually wanted a rigged system. They don't want people of religious belief to be able to practice their religious beliefs in the public square when they come in conflict with the agenda of the left. And so it's just not true that this green light's discrimination. It is just a balancing test for courts to use. Courts understand there has to be a compelling government interest. And here's another example I'll give you. This is a good one. So there's a Native American young man in school, and it was part of his religious belief to have long hair. And the school said, you can't have long hair. You either have to hide it or cut it. And the court ruling was there's no compelling government, there's no discipline issue, there's no safety issue, there was no compelling government interest to forcing this young man to cut his hair when it was a violation of his clearly, firmly held religious belief. So the court said, no, you can't do that. So that's another example of how this could be used and I think stands in conflict to the claim that it is going to greenlight discrimination. That's just silly. Again, if there's a compelling, for instance, there's compelling government interest to prevent discrimination in housing. I'm sorry, but regardless of religious belief, you don't get to discriminate when you're renting someone an apartment based upon something you don't agree with them on. However, it might apply in a different way if you're talking about participating in a religious ceremony, such as a wedding. So that is why, it is never green-lighted discrimination. Now, the other side might claim it's discrimination if a florist were to successfully use RFRA and the courts were to rule because of that strict scrutiny standard, compelling interest, narrowly tailored. Were the court to rule in a hypothetical situation that a particular florist did not have to supply flowers for that wedding because there's thousands of other florists that would, and why should government discriminate on religious beliefs on that? Then I think that's probably what they would call discrimination. I would call that standing up and protecting religious liberty.
Well, and the Odegaards from Grimes, Iowa, may have had a better case if RFRA in Iowa had been enacted because they lost their wedding chapel to a suit similar to what you've just described. Possibly, but again, it's not going to ensure winners and losers because we do know that there's been one case where a baker or florist lost under RFRA, and so the courts are going to apply that standard, but that balancing test is there. It doesn't ensure there's going to be a winner or a loser. Well, I would argue that these tests will be less frequent because some of them are simply attacks against people of faith. They're simply legal challenges to attack those of people of faith.
So theoretically, it could have discouraged.
Exactly, that's my point.
It could have discouraged it because they know that compelling interest test now exists in the state of Iowa.
Very good. And how is this going to play out in the election?
That's a good question. I think that I have no expectation that it's going to be a negative toward those who supported, those who voted for it, because I think people understand the importance of religious liberty very, very well. So I think I have no problem going out to the people of Iowa during my election and saying I stood up for religious liberty and a balancing test to ensure that this fundamental right is held to the highest possible strict scrutiny standard. So if it impacts it in any way, I think it would be in the opposite direction, frankly.
Yeah, I think as you explained the balancing test, that's really the key to this thing, is it gives everybody an opportunity to have their say in court and to be judged against is there compelling state interest in this regulation, and is it narrowly construed to affect what needs to be affected and no more. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you.
Job
so
well
much.
done. Thank you for fighting for people of faith.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Representative Steve Holt. We appreciate your time here today. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Sure. They can email me. My legislative email address is Stephen, STEVEN, Holt, HOLT, at legis, legis.iowa.gov, G-O-V.
Very good. We hope you won't get too many nasty emails.
Oh, I imagine that happens.
Yeah.
That's okay, yep.
Thank you very much, Representative Holt.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank
you. Gina and I will be right back after these messages. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and we have with us right now Julianne Fleischer, who is a legal counsel for the Advocates for Faith and Freedom, which I believe is out someplace in California, in the land of fruit and nuts out there. Good morning. I know it's early for you out there, Julianne. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Very good. Now, you are working with the Advocates for Faith, or the Advocates for Faith and Freedom, and that's an organization that we've had on several times over the past couple of years. But just to refresh people's mind about what you do and who you are, you want to explain what Advocates for Faith and Freedom are and what they do?
Sure. So Advocates for Faith and Freedom, we are a nonprofit law firm, and what that means is that we represent clients free of charge. So we rely on donors to support our work, and our organization focuses on safeguarding constitutional liberties. So that could be religious freedom, free speech. We have some cases focused on election integrity, parental rights, rights of children, both born and unborn. And so our organization is passionate about defending the Constitution, and so we provide our legal services free of charge for our clients, and we support and stand behind our clients who are out there in the real world, standing up for their faith and their religious beliefs. And so because of generous donors, we're able to do this work and represent our clients.
And if people want to see what you really do and see some of your cases, they can go to your website. I believe it's faith-freedom.com. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. They can go there. We have a case summary page where it lists all of the cases that we're working on, and links to the legal documents in each of those cases, so they can see what we're up to. And on our webpage, we also have links to our Facebook and Instagram page where we post regular updates on our cases and talk about some of the cultural issues that we're facing. And
another important thing that you can do there, if you feel so inclined, is to make a donation. If you have some small change left over after everything we go through in the economy today, you want to pass on to a good organization that will help people. There's a place on there you can do that. All right, let's talk about some of these. Appreciate that. Thank you. Let's talk about some of these cases that you have signed off on as, I guess, the lead attorney for your group there, and they have to do with COVID regulations and people who are not taking the COVID vaccine and who have applied for an exemption and are being terminated or disciplined because of that. Can you kind of consolidate the three that you're dealing with, or that's all I know you have is three. You may have more than that. And what the things are that are similar in all the cases that you're finding?
Yeah, so believe it or not, we are still dealing with the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the mandates that different employers put in place throughout the pandemic. And so we have a couple of clients that we're representing different matters, different employers who during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic implemented both COVID-19 vaccine mandates, mask mandates, COVID-19 testing mandates, the whole slew of the COVID-19 mandates. And so a couple of our clients had religious objections to receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, and so they followed their employer's religious exemption process. So for most of them, that entailed completing a form, submitting that to their employer's HR department, And depending on the employer, some were able to go through a religious accommodation process, so they were able to talk with their employer and discuss the religious objections that they had to their to the COVID-19 vaccine. We have one client who submitted the religious accommodation request, and their employer immediately terminated them. Actually, the employer banned access to the employee's online computer portal system, and so when the employee reached out to their employer to ask, I can't log on to my email, I can't log on to my employee portal, the employer informed them that because the employee didn't have the COVID-19 vaccine and had, refused to get the vaccine, they were going to terminate them, and so the employer subsequently terminated that employee. And so there's a common thread in all of these COVID-19 vaccine cases. We have individuals who had sincere religious beliefs. They wrote out, scripture that supported their beliefs for why they couldn't get this specific vaccine. And they followed the legal means to request a religious accommodation, and these employers refused to accommodate those religious beliefs. And what's interesting is for all of those cases, those three cases that you are mentioning, the employer had provided accommodations for individuals that had medical objections to receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. So whether that meant that the employee could work from home or could work in an isolated workspace, the employer worked with the employee to figure out a way for the individual to continue to work and fulfill his or her work duties. But when it came to our clients who had religious objections, the employers terminated these employees. And so we were able to file lawsuits on behalf of these clients and claiming religious discrimination under Title VII and also under the California state equivalent code that prevents employers from discriminating for religious reasons. And so it's unfortunate. We're nearly 4 years out from the pandemic, and we have these individuals that are still dealing with the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, and these individuals excelled in their workplace. Some of them had been at their workplace for over a decade and, were treated second class, quite frankly, because of their religious beliefs.
It's kind of interesting. We had on years ago an expert from the Heritage Foundation, Sarah Parshall-Perry. I don't know if you're familiar with her or not, but one of the things that we had her on for was not what she wanted to talk about when she got on the air with us. What she wanted to talk to us about was new regulations that were coming out of the federal government about federal employees that wish to apply for an exemption and the rigmarole that they had to go through. And one of the things was that they had to file, they had to give the employer all of their former names. So if they were married before, they'd have to give them their married names. Or their maiden names. They'd have to give them a physical description of themselves. They'd have to give them the list of all of the places where they had resided in the past so many years. And they also ask them the strength of their religious beliefs, personal things about what they believed in. Obviously, that had just come down that morning to her, and we took it and put it on the air right away. But have you run across anything like that?
I haven't in any of my cases. Okay. What is interesting, though, in the two clients that I'm thinking of right now, one employer did ask for follow-up additional information about the employee's religious beliefs. So the employer had a standard form that employees filled out if they had religious objections to the COVID-19 vaccine. And after our client submitted that form, the employer came back and said, we need to hold a meeting, and the employee was grilled up and down about his beliefs and how long he's held those beliefs and what church he goes to, how often he goes to church, how often he's shared his religious objections to the COVID-19 vaccine, just very invasive questions. And really when it comes to religious discrimination and whether any employee is seeking a religious accommodation, it's a very low standard that an employee has to show, but they're basically they need to be able to demonstrate they have sincerely held beliefs, religious beliefs. And so when employers start crossing the line and going in depth and asking these invasive questions, it's, one, completely inappropriate, but also illegal. And so we're seeing, just as we're progressing in these cases, it'll be interesting to see, how the employers justify their actions in asking these incredibly invasive questions. It's interesting. We have employers on one end that ask incredibly invasive questions regarding an employee's religious beliefs. And then on the other hand, we have employers who didn't even look to see whether, there was a valid religious objection to the COVID-19 vaccine and immediately terminated the employee and didn't look to see whether the employee could be accommodated. And, as evidenced by the employer's ability to accommodate those that had medical objections, it's just interesting to see how people of faith are treated.
Yeah, now you're out in California. Does California have a Religious Freedom Restoration Act?
Yes,
okay.
We do.
All right. So this is all done now. I take it most of these cases are filed in federal court, and we know there's a federal Religious Freedom Act. Are those, as you're pursuing these things, are those two laws, the national and the federal one, assisting you in being able to protect these people?
So for these cases, we actually filed under Title VII,
okay.
which is the anti-discrimination statute. So we filed under Title VII and then the state equivalent, the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, on the same basis. So discrimination on religious grounds and discrimination or failure to accommodate an individual's religious beliefs. So those are the two, the federal and state statutes that we brought these lawsuits under because we believe it's the strongest statutes that would allow our clients to recover financial damages as well as hopefully hold the employer accountable for their actions.
Okay. Now let me turn for a minute to what the advocates are doing, the Advocates for Faith and Freedom. There's a number of cases that I see on your website and that come across in press releases involving churches, and many of them involve churches that cannot comply with COVID regulations, and they're either being shut down or fined a humongous amount on a daily basis for not complying. How are those working out, and what is the connection here between the exemptions and maybe going after some of these churches and pastors?
Yeah, so we have represented a number of churches who face fines and penalties for staying open during the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you can remember, there was a time where churches were ordered to be closed. I think in California, that period of time was extensive. Churches were ordered to close, to not meet in person or to gather. And so we had a number of churches and pastors reach out to advocates and say, we're commanded in Scripture to not forsake the gathering of believers. And so we, feel strongly that our religious beliefs compel us to continue to meet. And so as a result, one of our biggest cases is Calvary Chapel San Jose. And the county of San Jose sued Calvary Chapel San Jose for staying open and for violating the COVID-19 orders during the pandemic. And so as a result of the lawsuit, Calvary Chapel San Jose was ordered to pay over $1 million in fines for violating those COVID-19 orders. So we're actually appealing the lower court's decision, and the United States Supreme Court has numerous times vindicated church rights as it relates to many of the COVID-19 orders, as it relates to vaccines and face coverings, and at one time there was a singing ban. And so the Supreme Court is definitely on the side of religious freedom, and even in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and the various COVID-19 mandates, we feel very confident that the Supreme Court will vindicate Calvary Chapel San Jose and other churches that, continue to face the legal consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and some of these power-hungry government entities. And so it's interesting because I would say about half of our cases right now are still dealing with the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. So whether that's individuals who lost their jobs because they had religious objections to the vaccine, or it's these churches that are facing fines and penalties for staying open during the pandemic to meet the needs of their community. And so we're still dealing with a lot of these issues, but I mean, it's incredible to see these pastors and these individuals who, you know, are standing firm to their convictions and to their beliefs and their faith, and no matter the consequences, their desire is to follow the Lord's leading and guiding. And so it's incredible to watch these individuals and just these powerhouses of faith. And for us to be able to represent them, it's quite the honor.
Yeah, it certainly would be. Now, this is going to be the $64 question here. Where's this religious animus coming from, or is it religious animus?
I absolutely believe it's religious animus. I think there's the legal side of it, but I also think that this is a spiritual warfare. People hate the light. The world hates the light, and I think we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic just this desire to squash the light and people of faith. And so we have government entities and private employers who have this vendetta against people of faith. And it's unfortunate because, you know, as employees or employers fire people of faith, what's left? We have another case where we represent a teacher who is a strong, committed Christian. She's been a teacher, you know, dedicated to serving her students, and she followed her religious conviction. She couldn't comply with some of the policies, the gender identity policies that her school district was implementing, and as a result, the school district fired her. And so it's unfortunate because we see across all fields, all career fields, with churches as well, just people being persecuted for their faith by losing their jobs or facing fines and penalties. And so the enemy hates the light, and so that's part of the reason why our firm exists, is so that we can, you know, defend these individuals who are bold in their faith, and hopefully, you know, it's never fun to go through litigation or to go through the legal process, but hopefully by us providing, you know, representation free of charge, it takes the financial burden off some of these individuals who are, you know, have lost their jobs and have lost a form of income, but again, followed their convictions and their beliefs.
Yeah.
Juliana, I have a question related to the cases you're handling with regards to the COVID exemptions that were not granted. As these cases percolate through the court system, does it help at all that the CDC has redefined the severity of the COVID virus similar to a flu? And, you know, we're getting more and more data about the efficacy of the vaccines and the adverse events of those vaccines. Do any of these facts help your case at this point?
Yes, that will absolutely help, because a lot of times that these employers are going to argue, and again, these cases are pretty early on, so it's hard to know what exactly the employers are, you know, going to raise. But a lot of times we're seeing that employers are saying, you know, we did it for the health and safety and well-being of, you know, our company and other employees. And so, you know, as more and more scientific data comes out, that's going to help establish that, you know, there were means to accommodate employees, whether that was allowing them to work in isolated workspaces or allowing them to work from home, or there's a whole slew of accommodations that could have been permitted. And I think, you know, as more data comes out and we see, okay, that the pandemic wasn't as serious as as the government made it out to be. So absolutely, it will certainly help these cases.
In any of these cases, are we suing for damages or reimbursement for lost income, or Any other kinds of punitive?
Yep, yeah. All of those cases, we are suing for lost wages as well as future wages as well. And like I mentioned, there were a couple of the employees had been at their jobs for over a decade, were eligible for bonuses and various upcoming benefits, and so we're certainly going and asking for the damages for these individuals.
Am I misreading something, or is so much of this stuff coming from the West Coast? As I look around, I get a lot of press releases from a lot of organizations, and I see a lot of the news articles. It seems to me that a lot of this stuff is being focused along the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, and California, just to name a couple. And I'm wondering, is it in the water out there, or is it in the food, or is it in the environment, or what is going on?
Well, I think a lot of these issues do originate on the West Coast and in California. However, even though our law firm is based in California, we do have clients all over the country. We have a case in the state of Maine. We have a case in Maryland, not necessarily related to COVID-19, but issues related to religious freedom. And so, what happens in California does not stay in California.
We're finding that out, yeah.
For that matter. Yeah, you're finding that out, and even just, we're constantly being contacted by concerned parents just, for their children and what's being taught in schools. And, that's not just a California issue. We get phone calls and emails from concerned parents all over the country, who are appalled at what's going on just even within our schools. And so there's a lot in California that keeps us busy, but we also have other, individuals who, are facing just
well, we found that out a long time ago as we first started this program, that what happens in California doesn't always stay in California, that it migrates eastward and it catches up on it. I think we're pretty much out of time right now, but I did want to thank you for joining us today. And I want to remind everybody, if people have a question, want to see more about what you do, or even have a legal question, it's faith-freedom.org is the website, and you can also make a quick donation there if you want to help these folks out any. Julianne Fleischer, we appreciate your time and wish you Godspeed in what you're doing, and please give our regards to the rest of your staff.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. God bless you. And we will be right back with a wrap-up after these messages. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we are back. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. Gina, again, another, I always say an interesting show, but it's more than interesting. I think it was informative, too.
Yeah, wasn't it nice to have Representative Holt in the, studio?
Yeah.
Yeah, to get a perspective on how this legislation bubbles up and the court cases that initiate it, and the support or lack thereof it gets from our elected officials as it's percolating through the system. The governor signed it last week, so that puts us in the group of 30 states now that protect 30, people of faith. Mm-hmm. So it gives us an ability to not be so attacked in the court systems, if I understand the legislation.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it was not a bipartisan bill. That it was totally polarized.
Well, at this point in our history, yes.
And it was bipartisan when it was the federal government did it under Bill Clinton years ago. But now we've become so polarized that not a Democrat would vote for this, and every Republican did. And I'm surprised at not surprised at the arguments, but I hear these arguments all the time. This just gives you a legal excuse to discriminate.
Well, we hear so often the separation of church and state, and this is almost the opposite of it, where without RFRA, the state would use its power to literally get into the church's business. Mm-hmm. So if you truly believe in separation of church and state, then keep yourself out of the faith part of it.
Yeah. And Julianne was Very
yeah,
good.
I can't wait to hear about the results of these cases. I knew when they were coming down, my heart broke for all of the individuals who tried to get religious exemptions, including our young men and women in the military who were at a health risk, really, to be getting the vaccine. And I'm glad to hear that these cases are still percolating through the courts and that some of these people will be awarded damages when it's resolved.
And this is the one legal group that seems to have, for some reason, these cases have flowed to them, because every time I check with Advocates for Faith and Freedom, it seems they've got another one of these cases with a church. And when I saw the 3 that were done by the same attorney there, I thought, there's something here.
If we had opened our churches in violation of the law or rule, would we have been in trouble with the state in Iowa?
Probably not the state, but the federal government would have come in. I mean, we had a governor who supported religious freedom, and so I don't think there would have been anything in the state. Now, we have a Soros prosecutor in Polk County. That might have made a difference if that person was in power at the time.
That's a lot of ifs, but
a lot of ifs. But I don't know what would have happened. I don't think they would have taken on the Catholic Church. I just don't think they would. Mm-hmm. If you notice, there's a commonality in all these churches they've gone after. They're very small churches. They're not big as
mega churches.
Not mega churches. Now that doesn't mean they don't have a lot of adherents. A lot of people come to them, but they are. And I don't want to call them fringe churches or anything, but they're not the mainstream Protestant churches. They're evangelical churches, and they're churches that most people haven't heard a lot about. Yet they'll stand their ground. And that's the conundrum that the government is in. If they try to take on somebody like the Catholic Church, we're as big as they are, and we're going to fight back hard. These little churches, though, are the ones that will stand their ground. They'll say, no, we aren't doing this, and we'll go to jail first, which is an admirable position, I think.
Sure.
But, so a lot of those churches are represented by this group. And so, and you heard what Julianne said they also do. They do, parental rights and things like that, like all these groups do. So, and it's nice to know that they work in other states.
Keeping busy.
Yeah, they certainly do. This is a full employment thing for lawyers, I think, on both sides. But anyway, that's...
Speaking of children, we have a case that we're following out of Washington.
Yeah, now we have that. It was, I think it was First Liberty that is working on that case. Yeah, it's First Liberty, and we've had First Liberty on many times here. And they have sent a letter to a school board asking for a correction. And what happened here is this little girl, I think she's about 11, something like that, and she was interviewed on Fox News at night last night. And they played that part of the interview this morning. A cute little thing, and just a darling little girl. And she's saying, we just kind of felt alone. Everybody else was grouping together, and we decided that after they did the Pride thing, had Pride group, maybe we could have a prayer group. And they went together, these kids. It wasn't the adults, it was the kids that went to the school and said, can we have a prayer group so we can be together with our people? And the school said, no. Can't do prayer.
Can't have that on campus.
You can do Pride, but you can't do prayers. Now,
I think First Liberty might set them straight.
Well, there's going to be hell to pay on that, because the law specifically says if you open up for any other non-academic group in the school, you have to give all of them an opportunity. And Pride is a non-academic, or at least so we would think. Prayer is a non-academic. And so they're treating them both differently, which is going to be an Achilles heel for them.
Do we have time to talk about the Soros-funded radios?
Yeah, the Soros organization is going out, and I think they're buying up a lot of radio stations. They did this about a year or two ago. They bought a lot of Spanish-speaking radio stations.
Or they tried to. I'm not sure they were successful.
I don't think they got it through the way they wanted it, but they started it. And yeah, this is going to be a means for the Soros groups and the Soros thinkers to help indoctrinate people out there with their ideology.
Yeah, leftist, progressive, Marxist,
communist,
yeah.
You name it.
Yep.
I think that's it. But anyway, that's where we are in that. So we will see.
This will not be one of those radio stations.
No, this will not be one of those radio stations. They may burn us down, but we won't go over. I think we're pretty much out of time now, so let me do our defender's prayer. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls.
Amen.
Amen. That's it for this week. We will be back again with another edition of Faith on Trial next week. Until then, have a blessed and peaceful week. Don't forget to go to church and take your kids.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. Faith on Trial, with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano. Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, iowacatholicradio.com, and the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.